We are now recording, and that privacy statement is now in the chat box. So good morning, everyone. I hope you all had a really wonderful holiday season. And we are on webinar number 3 of the member and site development portion of our planning grant curriculum, which is exciting. It's my favorite part. So some of the learning that we've had to date, to just summarize where we've been. In Q1, we talked about kind of that AmeriCorps 101 and the guidance. And then we talked about theory of change, logic model, performance measure, that type of thing. And I do know that some of you are diligently still working on those. So let me know if anybody wants to revisit some of that. Then this quarter, we've talked about the member and site things. We've talked about benefits and eligibility, recruitment, prohibited activities, and then training and supervision. And then today we're going to be covering member and site development, as focusing on position descriptions, member service agreements, and host site agreements, and tackling some time tracking. And then up next, our next webinar is going to be February 2nd, and we're going to be talking more about that member and site development. I am seeing a question in the chat box that a couple recordings have not been posted yet. That is correct, and we are working on that. I missed a piece of the process, and then there were people who were out on leave, so I have figured out what went wrong and working to get those posted for you very soon. So we always give you some questions to consider when you're moving through this curriculum. And I'm only going to talk to the bolded ones. Those are the ones that we're going to be addressing today. So as you're developing your position descriptions, make sure they're free of prohibited activities. I want you to be thinking through, as we talk about member service agreements, how you're going to be introducing those and going over those with your members. And then time tracking systems. Are you going to be using a paper system or electronic? And if it's electronic, there are some AmeriCorps requirements that we'll get into a little bit later. And then, as always, I'm going to keep coming back to this question, but as we go through this new knowledge and this new learning, is it going to change your budget or match in order to run a successful program? Okay, position descriptions. So today it's really nuts and bolts. Today is hopefully going to be a shorter webinar, but make no mistake, each of these topics is significant and will take some time to develop outside of today's learning. And while much of what we are talking about is tactile and tangible and rooted in compliance, the spin is in everything you create. Make sure you're centering the member for success. So in thinking about that, the position description, what does AmeriCorps have to say about it? It is required that all programs, all subgrantees accurately and completely describe the activities to be performed by each member in a position description. And that is outlined in the AmeriCorps terms and conditions. It also goes on to say recipient must ensure that each member has sufficient opportunity to complete the required number of hours and must account for holiday and other times off, provided each member with sufficient opportunity to make up each hour. So if you're thinking through what your service term will look like, and by that, I mean, like, how long is it? Is it going to be 10 months? Is it going to be less than full time and at 6 months? Or are you going to stretch it to a full year? Will your members have enough time to complete their service and have time to take off? Right now, we have some programs that are a little bit stressed out because there's still some COVID requirements around like isolating and don't come into your service location until you have a negative COVID test, which is a lot more time away from their service than some of these programs had anticipated. So really make sure you're doing the math and looking, is it reasonable that somebody can complete the hours and have time off so that they can have personal time and sick time and not burn themselves out. Because yes, it is possible even within a year or a 6-month term to start to feel burned out. And again, thinking through, is your position description setting your member up to really succeed in their position? Sometimes the term service opportunity is thrown around, and there might be a question, is a service opportunity different from a position description? And yes, they are. In the AmeriCorps world, sometimes our terminology is funny. We can use multiple terms for the same thing, and sometimes multiple terms are very distinct. And position description and service opportunity is one of those. So the service opportunity, when we talk about those, everyone is required to advertise and post their service positions in AmeriCorps, the grant, or not AmeriCorps, eGrants, the AmeriCorps grant management system, which is kind of the backside of it, the programs, commissions, and AmeriCorps sees. The front side or kind of external side that members see is called My AmeriCorps. And so service opportunity refers to connecting members, the recruitment posting. Then the position description is a fuller, more detailed description of what the members' day-to-day service will look like. Both have similar information in content. One is designed to attract members or candidates to your position, and one is designed to really detail out what that member service will look like. So, where does the position description live? There are a couple different answers to this. If your program is one that has a single focus. So all of your members, regardless of where their host site might be, if they're serving internally or serving at external service locations, if every member is doing the same thing, what we often see is programs including the position description directly in their member service agreement. And we're going to tackle member service agreements next. But know that you can put the position description in the member service agreement. The other option, if your members are doing different things based off of where they're located or the position or position title they have, or if you're a multi-focused program, it's easier, instead of having multiple member service agreements, to have the member service agreement reference the position description as an addendum, but have the position description as a separate document, unique to each member. Either way that you do this, if it's incorporated in the member service agreement or if it's a standalone document, the member needs to receive a copy and the program keeps a copy for your grant record. You get to choose if it's signed, if it's a signed document, or if there are no signatures. And there's pros and cons to each way, right? If there's a signature, you can always, and something comes up, you can reference to the member, hey, this is in your position description. But if you do have a signature line and for one reason or another it doesn't get signed, that opens it up to a red flag and questions, even though it's not necessarily required. All right, what are some of the basic components of a position description? Your position description should have some details about your program. What's your organization and the AmeriCorps program? What's the intent of it? What are the goals? If your members are serving at off-site host site, there should be some information about that location and the details about that site. It should have supervisor information, so it's really clear who the member needs to go to for supervision or to ask questions of. Each member should have a position title. However, having said that, as you're thinking about position titles, really think through if it sounds like a staff position. So sometimes if it says program manager, that could sound more like a staff position than one that would be conducted by an AmeriCorps member. So kind of keep that in mind too as you're developing position titles. You'll want to list in your position description the days and hours of service. We have some programs that it's 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and then we have some programs that do 4-10s, and then we have some that have a lot of service on Saturdays, and so their programs are Tuesday through Saturday. So just have that outlined for clarity for your members. Program description, again, that's a little bit duplicative of what's up above. Service location, okay, that's duplicative too. We've got some duplication in here I need to fix. And then what are the responsibilities and duties of the member? what is it that they're going to achieve and how are they going to go about achieving that? Everything a member will do over the course of their service term should be outlined in here. And it doesn't need to be like super fine bullet points, like they will sign this document. It could be they will manage documentation for their project. But everything they do should be able to be tied back into that position description. Was there a question?
And if you heard me coughing, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Doris.
oh yeah, sorry, Doris. It's also a good idea in your position description to list the required or desired qualifications. And we encourage you to think through that really carefully. What is a necessary qualification to be successful in this position? And what might be a barrier? For example, we had in the past a program that said a qualification or a requirement for service is having a valid driver's license. But really, the intent of that was to be able to get into the office and do occasional travel within the community. However, their community had a really robust busing system. And so there were some candidates that didn't get selected as members because they didn't have a driver's license, even though they would have been perfectly capable of completing the assignments. So that's one of the things that we encourage people to look like as we lean into our DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, is thinking through what's really required, what's really desired, and would it be a barrier for somebody who could be a great AmeriCorps member to be able to serve. We've covered prohibited activities. You're going to hear me constantly going back to that because it's prohibited and a big deal. So make sure there's no prohibited activities. And with that, I know in all the positions I've had as staff, and I'm sure you all have seen the same thing, my position description says other duties as assigned. It should not say that for AmeriCorps members because that leaves room. What if one of those other duties as assigned is a prohibited activity? What does that look like? So on a previous slide, I didn't speak to it, but it was listed. At any point in time, AmeriCorps or Serve Washington can do a random check of position descriptions. And if it's AmeriCorps looking at it and it says other duties as assigned, it really makes them question what are those other duties and what's the possibility that those are prohibited. All right. So pausing before we jump into the member service agreement, I know one of you has requested to see some examples of position descriptions. We do have a template that's on our website under the subgrantee resources, but I'm also going to, when I do get this recording posted, post it on the planning grant page as well. So we do have a template. However, if you want to see an example, let me know and I will pull an example that we have, or think if we've got a program that has a member doing something similar that I can request if they would kindly share that. So does anybody have any questions around the position descriptions?
No.
Okay. All right. Next up is member service agreements. This is also outlined in the AmeriCorps terms and conditions, and it's required that each member has a signed member service agreement. And the next slide is going to be talking about the requirements that need to be included in that. But the other part is that the member will need to sign the MSA, member service agreement, on or before their first day of service. So one of the things that we look at when we come out to monitor is we'll look at what is the member's start date, and it's the date in e-grants is the date of record, and does that start date in e-grants align with the signature on the member service agreement and the National Service Criminal History checks. So it's important that those are signed on or before. And the member service agreement is the document that's kind of like the contract between you, the program, and the member. So we really want to make sure the members are fully aware of all of their rights and responsibilities, and know some of the program policies and procedures going into the start of their service. Now, we often see programs will provide the member service agreement and say, we need this signed as part of your onboarding paperwork. And even if it's signed before going to orientation, strongly encourage you all to factor in planning your orientation to go over the member service agreements on that first day. Some of these topics that are required to be in there have a lot of legalese that might be confusing for somebody who is, you know, new to a professional role. So encourage everybody to go over the member service agreement with your members at orientation time. Now, I said that there could be some legalese. So what is actually included and required to be listed in your member service agreement? We already talked about position description. It is either right in the document or needs to be referenced as part of it. The member service agreement should also list the minimum service hours. So if you are having a program that's got full-time, the 1,700 hour, half-time, the 900 hour, and the reduced half-time, which is 450 hours, you could either do a chart that says, here's the number of service hours based off of what term it is, or what's a best practice is to have 3 different member service agreements, one for the full-time, one for the half-time, one for the reduced half-time. And also those minimum service hours get tied into the amount of the education award. So that also needs to be listed. standards of conduct. What are some of your rules and expectations for members and their conduct? A list of prohibited activities. You need to include the exact CFR language, which is where some of that legalese comes in. And you should pull that CFR, federal regulation language, for prohibited activities, non-duplication and non-displacement, and the fundraising limitations. We do have a template that, again, is on our subgrantee page of our website, but will also be posted with this recording on the planning grant website. And the template actually includes all of this language to make it as easy as possible for you all. There also needs to be the drug-free workplace requirement language, and then civil rights and responsibilities, and a complaint process. So if a member has a complaint, how can they go about reporting that? And then suspension and termination rules. We all want to believe that all of our members are going to be amazing and wonderful and have no performance issues, but that is not always the case. So thinking through if there are issues with your members, are you going to have suspension? What does that look like? And what are some of the rules around terminating them? Because members can be exited under two categories. Actually, there's three categories in which a member exits service. One, successfully completed service. Two is a personal compelling circumstance, a CPC, in which it's something out of their control. Like if there's an illness, or if they're a military family and their spouse is getting deployed. Yeah, if there's something out of their control that they need to leave service for, they get a personal compelling circumstance. It's not listed on here, but I would encourage you to reference that in your member service agreement. And then the last way is to be released for cause. That might be a member who's like, you know, I don't like my site, or I can't keep serving with such a low living allowance amount. Or it can be, oh, you seriously broke one of our rules and we're going to release you from the program. So outline the circumstances for release from the program. And then grievance procedures. Again, we have some language around that that we expect to see in those. But if there is, I'm kind of dealing with one now where a member was exited for cause, but disagreed with that, talked to the program, but did not feel satisfied with the response from the program and felt the need to take that to a higher level, which is absolutely within their right to do. So we want them to be able to look at their member service agreement and figure out what's the process, what's the procedure if they have a grievance. And then finally, other requirements established by you as the program. What rules do you have? What are other requirements that you have for the member? Okay, so that's all the required information. Oh, I jumped the gun with the compelling personal circumstance. This is where it is. Some additional things, that's the required, but some additional things that Serve Washington will strongly encourage you to include are what other benefits. Oh, and I'm going to go off course a little bit. One of you all raised a question in our one-on-one calls about a technology stipend that is in addition to payroll or the living allowance. And at the time I said, yes, you can do that, but it cannot exceed the maximum cost or the maximum living allowance. Well, in the last week or so, in the time since I talked to that planning grantee about that, AmeriCorps has come out and said that the maximum living allowance is just living allowance. Any other benefits that you provide to the member, like a technology stipend, or bus passes, or emergency funds, if you have one of those set up, those do not need to count towards that living allowance maximum. So I was pretty excited to hear that. However, there's not going to be additional funds to cover those. So you'll have to figure out what's your organizational values and have a budget that aligns with those values for supporting your members. All right, getting back on track, talking about member service agreements. If you are going to offer some of those additional benefits, make sure those are outlined in the member service agreement. And this is also where I encourage you to talk about your leave policy. Remember, earlier we had said to factor in leave when you're doing the calculation of length of time for the member service term. If a member does take sick leave, or if a member is planning on taking a little mini vacation, right? What is your policy and procedure for them asking for that leave? What does that look like for your program? We also encourage you to outline orientation and training requirements. With this, some of our programs that have members placed in different locations sometimes run into a challenge when they say, we're having a required training. A big one that we see, because it's one that we host, is the swearing in ceremony. Yes, it's a ceremony, but then later on there's a training component in the afternoon. And we often hear members and sites say, well, I don't want to go to that, or I didn't know I needed to go to that because I feel a commitment to being at my site. So if you're going to have routine periodic meetings, some programs do every Friday, some programs do once a month, some programs do quarterly. If you're going to be pulling your members together for meetings or trainings, we suggest putting that into your orientation or into your member service agreement. Also, make sure you put that in your host site agreement, which is something we're going to be covering a little bit later this morning. All right, performance reviews. Full-time members, the 1,700-hour members, are required to get 2 performance reviews. one in the middle of their service and one at the end of their service. And all of the less than full-time positions should also have performance reviews, but they don't need to do the mid-service. They just need to do the end of term performance review. And as we really position AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps service to be about professional development, really encourage you all to, when you do those performance reviews, think through and be intentional about how it is a professional development opportunity, not just, you're doing great with this, you need a little bit improvement with this, but really digging in to help develop some of those professional skills. Accommodation. There is a rule that reasonable accommodations should be extended to members. What does that look like? And how can they go about requesting an accommodation? We encourage you to list that process in the member service agreement as well. And the compelling personal circumstances. I mentioned that on the last slide, would encourage you to kind of lump those all together. But best practice to include that. And a media release. Again, there's specific language that will be provided for you around that. Because just like when I read the privacy statement at the beginning of these webinars, I do that because AmeriCorps and the Serve Washington's parent agency is really looking into some of those requirements. And one of those is around being able to use photos and pictures. You're going to be required to send in really good photos to Serve Washington. And every photo that you send in to us, we are making the assumption that there is a media release on file. There is specific language that will release the use of that image or voice recording to be used by AmeriCorps, by Serve Washington, by Office of Financial Management. So we do have some language. It'll be provided to you. Some people have this as a separate document. So in addition to the member service agreement, if your agency has required policies that need a signature, some just do a media release in that, and then some incorporate it into the member service agreement. Up to you how it looks, but want to see a signed member service or member release at some point. Oh, hold on. Any questions around member service agreements before we move on to host site agreements?
Did you say you can provide a template?
Yep.
Okay, because this is a lot to digest.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that everything that needs to be there is there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. There will be a template. And again, if you want to see an example from a program, happy to provide that as well in addition to that template.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so the member service agreement is that kind of like quote unquote contract between you and the member. It does need to be signed by program staff and the member. Some programs, if they're kind of that intermediary model and have host sites, they sometimes have the supervisor sign that as well. Again, you get to decide if you want the supervisor to sign it, but make sure that signature is dated on or before the first day of service. Now, you also want to have an agreement in place with your host site. So that is going to be driven by you as the legal applicant. What is your organizational practice in kind of partnering with other organizations? There is an example checklist in developing host site agreements that's also going to be included with this webinar recording. There's going to be lots of attachments for y'all to look at. And it varies greatly from program to program based on your organizational history and practices around entering into legal agreements. Is it just an agreement? Is it a memorandum of understanding? Or is it a full-on contract? You all get to decide, but you should have one of those in place. There's a template, but want to mention, put prohibited activities in here as well. Put in here that they need to release the members for you for those training and service projects and the Serve Washington swearing in ceremony. Really outline your expectations for the host site and what you as the host organization or the sub-grantee program organization, what you are going to need from the partnership with your host sites. Did that all make sense? Any questions around that?
No.
Cool. Okay. Time tracking. So this is going to be a little bit of a repeat from some of the stuff that's noted in the position description, but just want to call it out here because the time tracking is so important. With getting the education award, it's not about if you say member dates are from September through July is the date, the term of service. AmeriCorps doesn't really care how long the service term is. They just care that the members hit the 1,700 hours. So having accurate time tracking, timekeeping systems is highly important and can be a compliance issue if there's inaccuracies. So going back to the actual terms and conditions, the recipients, you all must ensure that each member has sufficient opportunity to complete the required number of hours to qualify for the education award. So that's kind of where it's duplicative of the position description and in determining what the schedule looks like. But then the terms and conditions go on to say, recipient is required to ensure that time and attendance record keeping is conducted by the AmeriCorps member's supervisor. So if you are at the program level, but you have a member serving in a different community at a different organization, the person, or yeah, host site, the person who signs the timekeeping record should be somebody who can attest to the hours that the member is actually serving. So if you're not having daily interactions with your members, you won't really be able to sign that. And it should be their direct supervisor who signs that. And this is because, going back to the terms and conditions, the time and attendance record is used to document the eligibility for the post-service benefits, in-service and post-service benefits. And there's a specific CFR around it. We'll kind of dig into a little bit of that. So, what else should you all know about time tracking? Your system should assess both minimum hours and leave, or not your system, you should be assessing that in developing your service term and developing how long that is, what member type, full-time, 3/4 time, part-time, factoring that minimum hours and leave in developing that service term. Developing leave policy as outlined in the member service agreement. You should also develop individual member timesheets and pay periods. Are members paid every other week? Are they paid monthly? What does your time period look like? At minimum, timesheets for members should be monthly, but they can be every 2 weeks if that aligns with your payroll system. Now, having said that, please make sure to note that this is a living allowance, not a wage, not a salary. So the hours should not correspond with the living allowance. The living allowance that they get on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis should be the same each time. However, a lot of our programs, in order to process payroll, need to have a timesheet on file. So that's kind of up to you as how that looks like. So in addition to the timesheet, you all should develop a program time tracking tool. So at any point in time, you can go and say, okay, where is a member in their term of service? Where are they on track to complete with the minimum hours? Are they behind and we need to think through a plan to get them caught up with their hours so that they can make sure they meet that minimum? You really want to be helping members keep track of that, because there's not much that's more heartbreaking than getting to an end of a term of service and realizing that your member is 10 hours short and not eligible for their educational award because of 10 hours. So you will want to kind of stay on track or on top of tracking that. We do have, again, a sample time tracking tool that we can provide to you, or you can develop your own if you have a system. Ensure full-time members have a lunch break that is non-service hours. And here, when this references full-time members, it's members serving in a full-time capacity, which sounds a little confusing, but you can have a half-time member who's serving 900 hours, but they're only serving for 6 months and they're serving 40 hours a week, right? That is full-time capacity and they still need to have a lunch break. That lunch break does need to be reflected in timesheets. Or, yeah. Ensure members understand the difference between tracking service, training, and fundraising. So each timesheet should have 3 categories. There should be a category for training, a category for fundraising, and a category for service. So you will want to train members on what activities belong in each of those categories, and that there are some limitations on the time that members can spend in training or conducting fundraising activities. Members cannot do more than 20% training, 20% of their total hours in training, and they can't exceed 10% of their time doing fundraising. So for that training, that's where developing that orientation and training plan comes in handy, because you can develop that and make sure that it doesn't exceed 20% of 1,700 hours or 900 hours, whatever slot type you're using. And then timesheets need to be signed by both the supervisor and the member. And they cannot be signed prior to the end of the time period. Because it's so important to be tracking actual hours, if a member is signing and submitting a timesheet on the 28th and is reflecting service on the 29th and the 30th of a month, AmeriCorps will question, the auditors will question, okay, this was signed before those days were served. What happens if that member got sick and didn't actually serve? How do we know that those hours are actual? So timesheets need to be signed on or after the last day of that timesheet period. Now, as technology is moving more and more towards electronic timekeeping, electronic record system, a lot of our programs are moving to using electronic timekeeping systems. This is totally allowed. But if your organization is using electronic timekeeping for your regular employees, it most likely meets the conditions required, but you'll want to double check. And if this is new to your organization, you'll want to look at this list that's here on this slide. Because programs can do member files, including timesheets, electronically, if there's an electronic signature and a way to ensure the validity and integrity of that record and signature. So your electronic storage procedures and systems must provide for the safekeeping and security of the records. So that includes, is there a way that the system prevents unauthorized alterations to the records? Does your system effectively secure and ensure that only authorized persons have access to those records? Does your system adequately measure or have adequate measures designed to prevent physical damage to the records? And is your system providing for a backup and recovery records for that electronic storage? Then there is a record retention policy for all of the records tied to your AmeriCorps members. Timesheets, enrollment paperwork, performance data, that's all going to need to be maintained for 7 years. But because that gets a little wonky, our office will email you and say, okay, it's time to destroy the records from this year. So you'll have to hold on to those records for a while. So in thinking about electronic timekeeping systems, do you have a way to store the records in a location that is accessible? Do you have clear and accurate labeling of all the records? So if your program director wins the lottery and quits their job to go live their life on a beach somewhere, right? And you have a new staff person come on board, and there is an audit from AmeriCorps, and they ask for records from 5 years ago. Will the new program director be able to pull those records? And when they do pull those records, are they in a usable and readable format? So, like I said, we are seeing more and more programs moving to electric timekeeping systems, and we also have programs that are still using the Excel template that I'll send to you. So, some flexibility in how you do timekeeping, but super important to really think through accuracy, validity, integrity of those hours, because that education award is tied to hours. So, any questions? Oh, I see one in the chat box. Are we saying we need to keep hard copies as well? Or if we're digitally confident, we can store them in our system as long as we can guarantee they are findable? Yeah, you could totally leave them in your system. I do know one organization, the reason that we talk about those having backups and having them in an accessible location. One program had a system crash and lost all of their electronic files. So encourage you to think through. Do you have adequate measures designed to prevent damage and loss of records? So I hope that answered your question. You can absolutely keep them all electronically. You know, the part of the point of moving electronic is to simplify and streamline things, but another part is to reduce paper waste, right? So, okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Going back to the minimum hours and the maximum. If it's a full time, we still need to put minimum hours, or just maximum 1,700?
So that 1,700 is the minimum.
Minimum.
Yeah. So if a member serves 1,690 hours, they would not get their education award. If they serve 1,700 hours, they would, and anything beyond 1,700 hours is just kind of gravy, right? They can go above that 1,700 hours, but that 17 is the minimum.
Will we pay them if we don't know how many hours they run to work?
What do you mean?
When I'm doing budgeting, I'm doing 17 hours, but now that you're saying it's minimum, it could be a lot more, right? So we need to budget to make sure that we can afford these workers. We call them participants,
Service members.
service members. So I've been using 17 hours, but now they can be potentially more.
Right. However, their living allowance is not tied to the hours that are being served.
Okay.
So currently for this year, the minimum low end of the living allowance for a full-time member is $16,502. That will go up for next year, should you all apply, but let's say 16,000 is the minimum living allowance. That's divided over the full time of service. So if you say you've got 10 months, you would divide whatever you have decided on for your full term living allowance by 10 months or 11 and a half months or the 12 months. So the pay shouldn't change. The pay should be consistent.
Okay.
Regardless of how many hours they're serving.
So what if you put in leave time? What if we don't know how much time they would want 6 months down the line? Or do we just go ahead and put it in just in case?
Yeah. So again, because it's not tied to leave,
Okay.
if a member does not serve any hours during a pay period, they will need to be put on admin hold or suspension.
Okay.
However, if they even serve 1 hour during a pay period, they will receive their full living allowance for that pay period.
Okay. The other question I have is on training.
Yeah.
So we don't spend more than 20% of their time training them how to do the work, right? Is that the kind of training you're thinking about? I'm sorry, I see it from different directions. The
Yeah,
other
totally.
training, the other training that I'm thinking about is, what if they are supposed to train participants? What if we train them so that they can join in the training later on to train the residents? Is that counted in the 20% or
Oh,
not?
no. The 20% is the training that the member receives.
Okay. But
It's
if it's
not training provided, it's training that they receive.
Okay, so if it's part of their responsibility to train, I don't know if it's going to be, or maybe it's just helping, then it doesn't come into play, right? Then it's
Yeah.
okay.
If part of their position description and service is providing training, that is counted as service hours rather than training hours. The training is,
Okay.
When you provide your orientation, that counts as training.
And I
Or
have Yeah, I'm sorry. I have one more question after you're done with that.
Oh, I was gonna say, if you also require your members to do first aid and bloodborne pathogen training, that would count as your training or towards their training hours. For this current year, Serve Washington, we are able to provide a lot of training opportunities for members. We are crossing our fingers and really hoping that we're going to be able to continue doing this in the future, if we get the funding to do so. So some of the trainings that they might go to for Serve Washington would count as training hours. So creating a little bit of buffer when you're thinking about that 20% for your training plan.
Okay.
But AmeriCorps service needs to be like, I always say a win-win isn't good enough for AmeriCorps. It needs to be a win-win-win, right? It needs to be a win for the organization. It needs to be a win for the community being served, and it needs to be a win for the member, right? Because if they're doing a year of service and only getting 16,000 for serving that whole year, what are they leaving with? What type of professional development and training and possibly even credentialing are you able to provide for that member, to help with the workforce development and help them with their professional development that they can leave their service term with? Did that make sense?
Yes, but
Okay.
I do have one more question.
I love it. Bring it on.
Yeah, and maybe two. Every time you answer one, another one pops in my mind. Let's say the member is responsible for three things, has three responsibilities at the whole site. And one of them is the EDS program. Can we just write our grant for the EDS portion, even though EDS is only a portion of their time? I don't know if you understand that.
Yeah, no, when it comes time to writing the grant, you can only do, and can you define EDS for the other people on the call?
Oh, the disaster services portion that we've been putting in the back burner. We would like to formally establish that, which is kind of like the third responsibility
Yeah.
of Salvation Army. One is the volunteer recruitment, which I'm sure they do probably 10% of the time. The other one that takes up a lot of their time is the dealing with the food insecurity and the shelter issues and all that. And so we would like to build capacity so that the members can actually continue doing the first and second, and then develop the third one, which is the disaster portion.
Cool.
And yeah, so it's not going to be 100% of their time doing disaster, but the grant is going to be EDS. Is that going to be a problem?
So the grant needs to align with what the members are doing. When it comes to talking about the evidence portion and some of the intervention portions and performance measures, especially, you can have those really tie into the EDS rather than needing to do one performance measure for EDS, one performance measure for food insecurity. But you need to talk about those other elements in the grant.
Yes, I was planning on talking about them, but the alignment from the theory of change all the way up to the outcomes would be EDS only. Is that kind of like what you're looking for? It's like we will, in the executive summary, will mention all the responsibilities, but the focus would be, since we're doing performance measures for the disaster portion, I thought the alignment would work from start to finish if we only do one of those, which would be disaster services. From the theory of change, the assumption, the input, the interventions, the outcome,
Mhm.
all that. And you
Yeah,
don't have to answer right now. We have to think about it because, um, we we come up with ideas and then the next week it's like, no, that's not going to work. And then so we'd like to get it kind of nailed down so that we
yeah,
can actually finish writing.
yeah. Well, that's what the point of this planning grant period is to really have that time to think through that and ask those questions. Um, you can spend a majority of your time talking about EDS, but you should be mentioning the other things.
All the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was worried about the alignment portion, that you only want one. So I was thinking, since we're doing disaster services, we'll just align it from start to finish with disaster services, but maybe just do background on the other things that we do.
Yeah. Yeah, just saying in addition to this, there are these other two areas of need that we're hoping or that our members will address. And then like in that logic model piece, the
Mhm.
logic model, you can do like a one line that ties into food security, right? So
Okay,
you can have it
okay,
in there um just to make sure that um what the members are actually doing at their
okay.
service location is reflected in the grant. Uh, but you can spend most of your time focusing on the EDS portion.
Thank you so much. And of course, I have one more. I promise it's going to be the last.
No worries.
Um, Education, and that was my question from before. Um, does everyone, or is there a good portion of people that do this kind of service have education in mind? What's that education
Oh, the
grant
education award.
award? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so that Ed Award can be used at qualified institutions of learning. So they can be using it to go back to school to complete their undergraduate or graduate degree or even a vocational school. Or it can also be used to pay back student loans. So if you have somebody who has just graduated from college but has student loans, they can apply that education award to that.
Okay.
Um,
So it's not for everyone, right? I mean, if we have a retiree that just wants to do some work to help out and doesn't have
yeah,
any plans to go back to school, then that wouldn't, that
so
is to be okay, right?
yeah. Well, another cool thing is if you have a member that's 55 years and older, they are able to transfer their education award to a child or a grandchild. There are some rules around that, but that is a possibility if you do have a retiree that's not going to use the education award. The other kind of creative thing that some people do is the education award also can cover supplies. So I have known alums who take their education award and enroll in a photography class at the local community college, and then use their education award to buy supplies for that class, like a camera or a new computer. So there are some workarounds.
Where do you get the education award? That's separate from this one, right?
So the education award is granted to members who successfully complete their term of service or have a compelling personal circumstance and get a prorated portion of that education award based on the hours that they actually served. And that is granted by the National Service Trust. And it's put into their My AmeriCorps account. And it's an electronic thing, and the members can just go in and they can say, I want to make a payment to this loan holder or this school.
So this is all in the beginning, they already know that that's what they want, right?
Not necessarily. They have 7 years to utilize that education award. So it could be they don't know what they're planning on doing after service, and 2 years down the line, they go, oh, you know what? I really liked
Take advantage of it.
yeah, I really liked this portion of my service, and I want to go into that field.
Okay.
And pursue training or credentialing using their education award.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so before we jump off, for our calls next week, I wanted to kind of get a sense of how everybody's feeling around some of the fiscal stuff. Would it be helpful for me to invite Thomas to jump on the calls next week? Or are you all at a point where you're wanting to talk about more programmatic stuff rather than fiscal stuff?
For us, I put in our new deliverables that we'll be working our budget plan on the week of the 9th. Is that the week you're talking about?
Yes.
So what day is it? I don't have you scheduled.
I'll need to double check on that, Doris, and I'll make sure to forward that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tom, it would be good to have Thomas.
Okay.
Yeah, Jenny, if it's Lindsay from Valley View, if Thomas is available, it would be nice to have, even just a touch point, because I know we did go like back and forth on some of our fiscal stuff with him most
Yeah.
recently. I'll just need to know if that's the case so I can have the appropriate team members available as well. If it's simply programmatic and like deliverables, obviously it'll be you and I, but it's kind of a different team if we do get into the financial stuff. So if you could just keep us posted on what to expect there.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And Girl Scouts, if you want to think about it as a team and shoot me an email if you want me to invite Thomas, let me know. And
were you talking to someone or everyone?
Oh, one of the planning grantees is Girl Scouts of Western Washington.
Okay.
So, okay. So to wrap up our day today, I wanted to talk about homework. And remember that homework and deliverables are different. The new homework based off of our call today is begin developing the position descriptions, begin developing your member service agreements, and if you're using host site agreements, start developing those, start thinking and developing a time tracking system, and update your budget framework. So if you are going to lean into an electronic timekeeping system, for example, and that'll be an expense, update your budget to reflect that. So that's homework. And then the actual deliverables. Now, and keep in mind, this is for the quarter. So you can send them to me as soon as you've completed them. Or you can wait until the end of May and send them all at once, however works for you. But by the end of May, you'll want to make sure that you have your National Service Criminal History Check certificate and the vendor set up. Which, have we covered that, or is that next week? That might be next week.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
So is it one vendor, what?
The vendor setup.
Okay.
I am going to want to see your member recruitment plan as a deliverable, and then your member orientation and training plan and plans around supervising members. And then from today, that member position description and member service agreement. I will want to take a look at those as well.
And Jenny, I came late, like the grant had been established, you know, by other people in my organization. And I just want to clarify, like, these are kind of works in progress that we get back and forth with you about in order to like get the feedback and get them ready in order to like pursue the operational grant. And for some of the things that are obviously going to get like developed faster, like I perceive our member position description potentially like coming together a lot faster than maybe our recruitment plan, just because we have other pieces in place that are similar. Does it matter what order these things are kind of approved in?
No, not at all.
Okay. Great. And I just want to make sure there's not like a hard and fast deadline of like disqualifying us from like our grants or future grants. It's more of like a work in progress at this point.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
definitely a work in progress. And I wanted to be guided by you so that what we're doing is helpful for you.
Right.
Like one of you I'm still working with around the logic model, right? Because that's where the grant is and the planning of an AmeriCorps program is. So if these all get done, awesome. If they don't, like, I'm not giving you a free pass to not do the deliverable.
No, of course.
But we can totally talk about it, right?
Okay.
So
and then will you email us directly, please, with the the template that you were discussing around like the stuff we introduced today? Just because I know somebody else mentioned it, but like the previous videos or slides and stuff haven't always been populated.
Yep.
Yeah, so if we could just have these, is it possible to have them emailed?
I will.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And got done about half an hour early. Awesome.
Cool.
And having said that, last call, for any questions that anybody might have.
No, I don't have right now.
Cool.
Oh, is this going to be available, online?
Yes,
Okay,
it will be. As soon as I track people down and tell them this needs to get up now, please.
Thank you,
Okay,
Jenny.
absolutely.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you all have a great day and think through this, and we can talk next week and circle back on anything that you might have questions over. So,
Okay, thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
yeah, have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.